evening and welcome to a special edition of the Vigilate Dialogues. I'm your host, Shaina Smith, welcoming you to the National Boardroom. With me this evening, I have a very special guest. He is our Commissioner of Police, Mr. Michael Matthews of the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. Welcome to the Vigilate Dialogue, sir.
Thank you, Shaina. I'm delighted to be here.
Yes, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation this evening. So, as a start, let our audience know a little bit about your background. As far as I know, you have about over 30 years of policing experience, and that you had a journey before you eventually got here to the Virgin Islands.
Yes, it was an interesting journey to finally arrive here in the beautiful Virgin Islands, but I started my career in 1982. You can work out my age for yourself if you like, but I was a young man patrolling as a young police officer in 1982 in the United Kingdom, first working in a force called the Kent Constabulary, and then subsequently I moved to Gloucestershire, where I eventually got promoted to the Chief Constable's post and finished in that force around about 2012.
Okay.
After that, luck seemed to be on my side because I thought that I was going to be retiring gracefully. However, I got offered a job to go and work in Cyprus in the Mediterranean, where I was the Chief Constable of Police for the British sovereign bases there, which is the UK Ministry of Defence bases located within Cyprus. Did that for nearly 4 years, a very challenging role, very close to countries like Syria and Iraq and Iran, and a lot of problems that were spilling over from those countries were affecting, the Mediterranean countries.
Yes.
So we had to be on our toes all the time. And I was looking forward to finishing there when I was told about the advert for the post here in the British Virgin Islands, and much to my shame, I'd never visited the British Virgin Islands until getting this job. Something that if I could put right now I would, but I'm avidly telling all of my family and friends back in the UK that this is a place to come and see because it's a wonderful place with wonderful people.
Thank you. So you took up the post now, it's still under a year. I believe it was in April or June?
April.
In April of this year. And now, what are your general impressions as far as the territory and specifically in terms of your area and looking at security and crime?
Well, first of all, when I arrived, as I said, as a complete newcomer, I wanted to sort of make sure that I understood more about the culture and more about the community. You can't just assume anything, especially from a policing perspective, and ultimately I'm responsible for the safety of the territory. So I spent a fair bit of time trying to get out of my office in police headquarters and speaking to the community, and I hope I've been reasonably successful at that. And I've had a lot of feedback from people about what they saw as the challenges for policing, for security and for safety, and how people generally felt. The good news story, although not everyone always believes it when they hear it, but the good news story is that I found this to be a very safe and secure place overall. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a problem. It doesn't mean we don't have crimes, but every society has that. But overall, this is a safe place to live and work and visit, and we want to keep it that way. It's important that our communities feel safe. It's important our communities feel free to operate unhindered by criminals. And we need to attract and continue to attract tourists.
Yes.
And that's important too, that they feel safe when they arrive here. So my impression has been so far, it is a safe place to live and work. I live here, I've brought my family here. I wouldn't have done that unless I felt it was safe to do so. I asked my family at home and my relatives and friends to come and visit, and they do. So for me, I need to be able to stand up and justify the statement that it is a safe place. So the people have been very welcoming. They've certainly made me feel part of the community. And I think the important part now is how we continue to work together during my time here to improve things even further and make it even safer than what it is.
Okay. So in terms of these concerns persons might have expressed to you, what were some of those?
People were generally concerned about traffic offences. First of all, that was one of the first things that landed on my desk. Was what are you going to do about scooter riders? What are you going to do about taxi drivers? What are you going to do about lorries? Now, people have got to make a living, and young people in particular have got to have freedom to move around the territory. And our roads are pretty safe roads overall. Some of them do need a bit of attention, and I often remark on that quite openly. If I think something needs addressing, I'll make that known.
Safety is very key.
Make it known so we have public safety first and foremost in our minds. But traffic and traffic violations seem to be the biggest concern, and I think it's common knowledge now that I listened to what the community said at the time, and we ran a traffic campaign through July and August, where July we were just warning people and holding a kind of amnesty. And then in August we very much committed to not tolerating traffic offenders. And we've seen a steady increase, sadly, of traffic offenders being prosecuted and traffic tickets being given out. But you can't prosecute problems away. You've got to educate as well. And part of my philosophy is not about trying to sort of like just target the motorist every 5 minutes of the day, but I do appeal to people to be sensible, and especially at this time of the year, to be safe on the roads.
And that's very key, because oftentimes I remark to people when they see certain accidents, we assume that it's just somebody did something wrong, but sometimes we're so distracted in our driving, using electronic devices and other things, that we're not being as careful as we should be. So
absolutely,
I share with that view in terms of us being more intentional with our driving, because sometimes I'm like, I'd rather sail to work than get on the road if I could, because I live in West End. So if I could, I would sail to town and then do my business and get back on the water. A lot easier out there.
I think you make a fair point, but I think that's an interesting observation. Because I live here in Tortola. I drive on the roads every day, as does my wife, and every now and again something happens right in front of me, and very often I'm in this uniform, and I have to speak to motorists, and people sometimes seem a bit shocked that the Commissioner of Police is standing there kind of wagging the finger at them. But I'm still a police officer too, and if I'm witnessing what's going on and if I can't intervene, then there's something wrong. And of course I also expect my officers to intervene, but I'm not looking to just continually target motorists. People have got to go about their business. And I repeat what I said. I'm asking people to think about their standards of driving, think about what they're doing when they're going to and from, and make it safer for everybody.
I think if we just extend more courtesy, everybody will be a lot happier.
I absolutely agree with that.
That would save us a lot of stress. Okay? So let's be more courteous to one another. Let's talk about, in terms of, you mentioned earlier that you worked at other jurisdictions, both in the UK and in Cyprus, which is, completely different cultures. How would they compare, you think, in terms of crime between here and there?
Well, we still obviously have a very low crime rate compared to some of the jurisdictions I've worked in, but of course it's all relevant to the populations at the time. So I don't sit here today thinking that things are out of control, and I know some people feel that on occasions when there's the odd spike in crime, and I'll clarify that point in a moment. But what I have discovered is there is a reluctance here within the Virgin Islands to come forward with information. There's a reluctance to go to court and give evidence as a witness. Sometimes there's even a reluctance as a victim of crime to report that crime. And that does concern me, because that is something different to the jurisdictions I've been to before. And I have to try and get to understanding better what that reluctance is about. Is it a mistrust in the police service? Is it fear that they're going to be exposed as a witness and potentially put in danger as a result of that? Is it just a general lack of confidence in the criminal justice system? Or is it something else? And I appeal to people that since being in this territory, I've been saying to people, you need to come forward with information. The police service can't solve society's crimes on its own. I'd like to think that, the police service could be everywhere, but as my deputy said just last week in a media statement, we can't. We can't be everywhere. We can't be everywhere 24 hours. If I could post a police officer outside every business at this time of the year, when there's a lot of money going through the tills and so forth, I would do it. But that's not reality. What reality is, from my previous experience, is the police working in partnership with communities, with neighbourhood watches, with volunteers setting themselves up to work alongside the police service, especially with the community officers, and providing information as to what's happening. Because we do get information, and since I've been appealing, people have been coming forward, but it's genuinely not enough.
Okay.
And if people want to continue to live in a safe society, then they need to think more about how they can help the police service to deliver that safety.
And I think there's probably that perception of, policing and public safety and security is like the police's job, so I don't want to get involved. And maybe even looking at being publicly ostracized because, somebody got, convicted because of information that you gave. But at the end of the day, there's consequences for actions, and it's all about the greater good. So I understand the challenge that's there. And I think one thing for me, as far as growing up in this community, like all my life, seeing the change actually in terms of, the types of crimes and violence sometimes that's associated with some of them, I think is really, the shift that some of us are seeing that's really concerning, because we can watch it on the news every night on Miami, and that's happening there every day. But for us now, that's never been a common occurrence. So it's kind of like, what's happening? There
is no doubt that we are seeing across the Caribbean, not just localized to the Virgin Islands, we're seeing across the Caribbean increases in violent crimes. But I think we ought to put some of this in context. And the first thing I'll say is that I'm acutely aware of the concerns that have been expressed over the last 2 to 3 weeks about what has been expressed as an increase in gun crime in the territory, an increase in violent crime, an increase in robberies. But let's put this all into context. And I'm not a great one for quoting figures, but I want to be realistic so that I can give people reassurance.
Okay.
So between 2010 and the beginning of 2015, the average number of robberies alone for the British Virgin Islands was about 32 a year. Okay? That's not great by anyone's measure, but that's what it was. That's factual. Now this year, 2016, we've had about 28 so far. Nothing to boast about, nothing that I'm proud about is happening. But the reality of what I'm talking about is that actually we're not seeing a suddenly violent crime and robbery spiralling out of control. What we're seeing is the average number of violent crimes that we've previously seen here in the Virgin Islands. But that isn't acceptable, because of course our job is to drive crime down and to reduce those incidents. We will never ever wipe out crime completely. That's just not reality. But what I do know is the police service just cannot deal with this problem alone.
Okay.
Now there are people out there who know where the guns are. There are people out there who know who the offenders are. And in fact, let me give you the most shocking example that I can give is quite recently we've had somebody who witnessed a robbery take place and didn't ring it in until after the offenders had driven off and were long gone. Absolutely no use to the police service whatsoever. If you see something happening, you need to call us, and you need to call us straight away, and we will attend. At this moment in time, simply because it is the festive season and there are a lot more visitors to the territory, people are doing a lot more shopping, there's a lot more people about, I believe that the public are entitled to have a greater level of reassurance. And what I've done is I've deployed additional officers onto our streets, and indeed only this morning whilst I was walking about doing my own little bit of patrolling, I bumped into 7 separate officers just in Road Town alone.
Okay.
So the increase is out there, it's visible, it's tangible, but I've also had to increase the number of armed officers. Now that is for the protection of the public and for the protection of those officers. But the message is very clear, that if criminals wish to pick up a firearm and wish to target innocent, unarmed people in such a cowardly fashion, then they're going to be met with a robust response from police officers, and in certain occasions armed police officers. That's the risk they're taking. And the police officers have the law on their side. Now I don't want to ever think that we're going to get to a situation where we'll have shootouts in the streets
I hope
of
not.
Road Town.
Yeah.
But the point being is that I am ready and we have the capability to address those levels of crime should people continue to behave in that way. But the reality is solving those crimes does take time.
Yeah.
Criminals operate in different ways. There are different groups of criminals here. Some try to disguise themselves, some try to avoid cameras, some try to do it in pitch dark. Some of them will make sure that their victim is completely vulnerable and that no one else is about. There's a lot of things the community can do themselves to protect themselves.
Okay.
And there's a lot of things the community can do to help us.
Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more in terms of that, but you just touched on, you know, what the force is doing to help reduce the incidents as far as the armed robberies and firearm related assaults that we've had in the recent weeks and months. The question then out there is, you know, obviously in terms of we don't manufacture firearms, it's not legal to carry a firearm here in the territory. So where are all them, where are they coming from, and how are you working with the other law enforcement agencies like Customs in terms of, you know, stemming that tide and trying to plug that hole wherever it is it seems that they're coming in through?
Well, Shaina, you make a really good point because, of course, you know, first of all, firearms here aren't legal in the territory without an authorised firearms licence, and I very rarely, if ever, sanction that because when people write to me and say, you know, I'd like a gun to protect myself, I have to remind everybody, you know, this is not America. This is not gun crime out of control, and crime levels are extremely low here compared to other territories and other Caribbean countries. But guns are arriving here. There is no doubt about that because, of course, we're seizing them, and we've continued to seize weapons this year, as have our colleagues in Customs. So one of the comments you made there was about what are we doing about that? Well, we're tracking back the passage of those firearms, and we know that a lot of the firearms are coming out of the United States and also from other Caribbean countries and being transported here on boats, not so much through the airport, but certainly through some of the boat traffic that arrives here in the territory regularly. And of course, we have to be realistic about it. We have very porous borders here. There are a lot of places where boats can pull up, where not necessarily my colleagues in Customs or Immigration or ourselves are able to always spot them.
Yeah.
But we know that they are coming in occasionally, and I've been across and I've spoken to my opposite number, the Commissioner in the US Virgin Islands over in St Thomas, and they are working very hard to stem the flow of firearms both into the territory there, but also across the territory into Tortola and beyond. Now the firearms, unfortunately, are connected with also the passage of other crimes such as drugs importation and drugs trafficking, and we're very alive to that fact, and we're working very hard with the US authorities, working very hard with Customs and with Immigration here in the territory to try and stem the flow, to try and monitor what's going on, and to provide intelligence and information to other law enforcement agencies where we can, where it doesn't affect us directly.
Okay. All right, so there's a lot of cross-border as well as inter-border collaboration on the problem.
Absolutely, but I'd like to actually take the opportunity to also just thank my colleagues in Customs because they've been doing a great job this year as well, and you'll have seen the work that they've been done reported in the media around you know, dealing with illegal boats, you know, unlicensed boats coming, but also they've been finding firearms during their searches as well, and that supports keeping our territory safe. Okay.
So let me ask a question. If I were to find a firearm, what am I supposed to do with it?
Okay, if you find a firearm, the first thing to do is don't pick it up. You know, we've had a lot of people who've done the right thing and phoned it in straight away.
Okay.
We have highly trained and experienced officers who can handle a firearm safely. You know, finding a firearm, you don't know if it's going to be loaded, you don't know, you know, whether the weapon is dangerous. Phone it in straight away. I can guarantee you're going to get an immediate response to finding a firearm.
Okay.
And the officers that turn up will be experienced officers who will know how to safely deal with that weapon. But also importantly, from a crime prevention perspective, I don't want the public messing up a forensic scene. You know,
I don't want my prints on it.
Exactly. We don't want an innocent person's prints on it.
No.
What we want to do is we want to be able to pick up that weapon, how it's been found by the member of public, and then we can examine it forensically, and we can take DNA from it, we can take fingerprints from it, we can examine every part of that weapon, and we can work out where it's come from, who may have handled it, and we have already made arrests as a result of public ringing in, saying they found a firearm, and doing the right thing by not touching it.
Okay, awesome. So that's a good piece of public information as far as persons like being able to assist with, crime prevention as well as reduction in our community, because, police, it really is everybody's business. And I know there was a big campaign a few years ago as far as reactivating the community policing arm of the force and making sure that, we're doing our part in terms of, assisting where we can.
And I understand though, Shaina, that some people, and using your scenario, some people might look and say, I found a firearm, I found it by accident, I don't want to get involved, I'm frightened that, I'm going to get targeted by the people who own that firearm. We do have other ways of reporting to the police where you don't have to get involved, and finding a firearm is a great example. You can phone anonymously and say where that weapon is, and we'll act on it.
Okay. All right, so then we can basically volunteer the information without necessarily getting,
As long as the police officer who attends has sufficient information to know where to locate that weapon. Once the police officer has found it, we can use that evidence in court that the police officer has found it. It doesn't matter that an anonymous tip was given to the police service. We can explain that to a court of law.
Okay, all right, and that wouldn't hinder any kind of prosecution that may result of it?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. What else can the community do to help in the efforts of crime prevention and crime reduction?
Okay, well, there's certainly an appeal I'm going to make today for some of our business colleagues here. They've clearly been concerned about some of the recent incidents that have occurred at supermarkets, at fuel stations and so forth. And what I say to them is this, I'm committed to round the clock making sure that we are providing as many patrols to look out for your premises. What I can't do is I can't provide you personal security on each of your premises, but you can do a lot yourselves. And there are still a number of premises out there that don't have CCTV installed, they don't have adequate lighting, and they don't have strengthened doors or toughened glass. Now, this is a reality of society today. A very, very small proportion of people living amongst us today are going to go and commit crimes. And of course, it is the minority that are going to affect the majority.
A big impact, yeah.
Has a big impact, exactly. Now, for me, we can do more ourselves, but it does mean a bit of investment by businesses. I'm delighted to see that some of our businesses have now got private security guards, and I also accept the fact that private security guards unarmed can't deal with an armed offender, but that is the police's job to deal with that, and the security guard's job is to just ring it in as soon as possible to let us know what's happening. But again, there have been examples in the last few weeks where we've attended crime scenes and the premises have got cameras, and when we've gone to look at the footage, either the cameras weren't switched on or they're not working, and that is really, to coin a phrase, shooting yourself in the foot. So it's just an appeal to say, if you've got the kit, make sure it's working. Make sure your staff understand how to operate it. If you've got poor lighting, just invest. It's not expensive. Invest in a few more lights to light your place up at night time. Criminals don't like to have lights shone upon them. They don't like anyone to see what they're doing. That's when they'll get away with it, when it's pitch black, there's no cameras, and they can't be seen.
So then there's it. Even what about from a home standpoint in terms of, at my house? Because you mentioned about lights, and one of the things that I know a lot of people do at night is basically we will turn off the exterior lights to the house. Is that something we should do, or what other precautions should we take, especially over the Christmas season when everybody's going to be getting all this new stuff?
Yeah, well, again, I certainly can't guarantee that people's homes won't be broken into. That's a fact of life. It does happen. We've got as I say, a small minority of people living here who think that's okay to go and steal from hard-working members of the community. But there are things, again, that you can do to help yourself. You know, yes, I can understand why people want to turn off the lights at night. You know, electricity doesn't come cheap these days. But, you know, it's not too expensive to get these lights now that will actually just come on by a sensor.
Oh, with a motion detector.
So motion detectors. And I've certainly got motion detectors where I'm living. Again, video isn't expensive to invest in these days, and just a video camera, you know, watching your front door, watching your back door, you know, just taping what's going on. Some people have alarm systems these days. I've found, however, you know, one of the most off-putting things for a criminal is normally a large dog. I personally own a very large German Shepherd dog. Not everybody loves dogs or animals and wants them in the house, but you know, a dog can give you an indication that somebody's about in the middle of the night. Yeah. You know, when my dog growls, I'm out of bed. Yeah.
Whether it's a mouse or it's a man, you're checking. That's awesome. Well, I think that's a very important message, again, because, you know, a lot of times we're reactive instead of being proactive, and I find that's one of the things with our culture that needs to change, as far as us now saying, you know, things are changing, and yes, they are, and a lot of it, as you're saying, we're not going to be able to reverse it. Back to the days when we might have had one robbery a year and, you know, maybe one violent gun crime. But that as a result of that, we have to become more conscious of our own security and playing our role as it is.
I think that's right. You know, I read the papers like anybody does, and sometimes I look at the comments, not often, but sometimes I look at the comments below the article, and I see people sort of looking back, and they say, you know, this is not the Tortola I knew, this is not the Virgin Islands I knew, and I really understand that. But, you know, the world has changed as a whole, and the Virgin Islands are no different. You know, society has changed. There is less respect for law and order, but that doesn't mean we can't have law and order and we can't have safety. But it does mean that more people have got to step up to the plate and say, you know, this is important to me to protect my territory, because the police service can't do it in isolation. And the police service are not expected to do it in isolation anywhere in the world. I go back to what I said, it is a partnership, and, you know, I appeal to the public. You know, you can trust my officers with information. If you don't trust my officers, and there's over 200 of them, you know, I'm sure you can find one you can trust, but if you can't find the one you can trust, then contact me personally at police headquarters. You know, I will take calls personally, because I think it's that important that the public need to have that confidence to be able to share what they know.
Yeah, that's probably one of the key things in terms of, again, because we're dealing with crime, you know, persons don't want to expose themselves unnecessarily. And jeopardize their life.
I understand that, but you know, also some of the most serious offences that have been dealt with across the world, including here in the Virgin Islands, have been dealt with through convicting serious offenders, because somebody stood in the witness box and said, I saw this happen and I saw that person do it. Now, you know, I commend those people who are brave enough to stand up for what's right. But equally, I just want to give some reassurance, you know, the modern criminal justice system today is capable of protecting witnesses. You know, our Director of Public Prosecutions will always look at whether it's necessary to put somebody physically in the witness box in the first place, whether it's necessary to reveal their details, whether they can talk from behind a screen rather than be seen by the offender, and so forth. There are a number of things that can be done to give that added reassurance when people are frightened. And I do understand that fear. But again, if you want to have your country remain safe for the future, we've all got to stand up and do something together.
Yeah, that's very key. Any final words? We're plenty out of time, but, you know, whatever, in terms of whether it's further tips or contact information in terms of persons reporting crime or incident, or even wanting to ask questions in terms of their own business security or their residential security? Well,
certainly we are willing always to give advice, crime prevention advice, and you'll have heard exactly what I was saying earlier on about the extra things that we'd like people to think about doing. But I would like to just make the point that we do have 2 phone numbers that are available 24/7 for people who can give us information in confidence. And the first one is a local one, and that's our intelligence unit within the Royal Virgin Islands Police Force. And that's 368 9339. 368 9339. You can ring that line, you can give anonymous information on that line, or you can assist us by telling you who you are and what's going on. You can also speak to Crime Stoppers. And Crime Stoppers is a free number. It's based in Miami. It's not even located here within the territory. And you can ring Crime Stoppers on 800-8477. That's 800-8477. And you can again give information anonymously.
Okay.
So at this time of year, I like to think that most of us are going to have a peaceful and safe festive season. And I think in finishing, I would like to wish all of our communities across the whole of the territory a very peaceful, healthy and happy Christmas. Just remember, you know, that Christmas time is a time when it's supposed to be peace and goodwill to all men and women, of course. And I do respect the fact that sometimes 3 or 4 days into the holiday, when families have been together for a long time, tensions arise. You know, when tensions arise, just think about being kind for a change instead of being angry. And if you feel angry, just walk away. Have a happy Christmas.
Well, Commissioner, thank you for joining us here on the Vigilante Dialogues. I hope this is your first, but the first of many other times. Feel free to come through and, you know, share with the public, you know, anything that's going on, because of course it's important that we get periodic updates as far as what's happening with the security of our country. You've been tuned in to a special edition of the Vigilante Dialogues. I'm your host, Shaina Smith, saying let's continue the change in conversation for a better Virgin Islands.